This is an Ielts test simulation. I'm Tennille. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Alex. I am originally from country Victoria, but I currently live in Melbourne.
Do you have a large or small family?
So my immediate family is quite large, but then my extended family is quite small. So I have an older brother, and then a younger sister and a younger brother in that order. We're all about 2 years apart. And then my mother has one brother who has 2 children, and my father has a sister who also has 2 children. So 3 siblings, 4 cousins.
Can you tell me something about them?
Sure. So both my brothers are lawyers, and then my sister is a nurse. And my parents are originally from Europe, so my dad is English and my mum is German.
How much time do you manage to spend with members of your family?
Quite a bit of time because, well, especially lately, since the virus happened, I moved in with my parents for a few months, and I'm using this time, we're going to renovate the house that I'm in at the moment. So I've spent the last 3 months with my mum and dad, and I'll spend about another 3 with them. And prior to that, I was living with my older brother and his wife. So I spend quite a bit of time with my family.
Great. What sorts of things do you like to do together?
So my older brother and I like to play video games. We've done that since we were little kids. My sister and I are very close, just as a normal sort of friendship. We just go out for coffee, we talk about our lives, just hang out in general. And then my younger brother is obsessed with coffee. So the two of us will go, we'll check out a new coffee spot, or he also loves exercise, particularly running, going to the gym. So we exercise together fairly frequently as well.
Do you get along with members of your family?
Yeah, I do. I think I'm very lucky compared to some of my friends. I've never had any major issues with any members of my family, and we've always just gotten along great. I think my brothers and my sister are some of my best friends.
Moving on to part 2, describe a teacher who has influenced you in your education. You should say where you met them, what subject they taught, what was special about them, and explain why this person has influenced you so much. So I'll give you the pen and paper just to jot down a few notes.
Thank you.
All right, time's up.
All right. So I think, as I mentioned before, I grew up in country Victoria, and I went to quite a small school. So when I first went there, it had only been open for a couple of years. So there were under 50 students in this high school. And the teacher that I had came in my second year, and her name was Miss Veeble. So she taught me English from years 8, 9, 10, and then in year 11 and 12, we moved on to a different English teacher. But until that point, she was our English teacher and our RE teacher as well. And it was also an Anglican school, so a Christian school. And up until that point, and after we had her as an RE teacher, we always just sort of learned RE from a Christian point of view. We didn't learn about any other world religions. Whereas this teacher was very refreshing because she was quite worldly. She traveled a lot. She helped out at an orphanage in Thailand. She'd adopted 2 children from Thailand. She was just very knowledgeable, and she was very open to everything. She was a little bit of a hippie, but it was great because it was very different to sort of the viewpoints that we got from a lot of other teachers living in such a small rural town in Australia. So she came in and she taught us in religion, she taught us all about Islam and Judaism and Buddhism. So we actually understood these people that we didn't have any real sort of exposure to growing up in the country. So I think the country can be quite closed-minded, and she was the opposite of that. She was okay with everyone, sexuality, gender, race, everything. She was very open and loving, and she taught her students to be the same in that regard. And then for English, she encouraged us to be very creative, which was very good and again, very refreshing, because a lot of the time we would just be writing essays and reading books we weren't really interested in. And then she came along and tried to really engage us and make us love our work. So we did a lot of creative writing, and she'd ask us the sort of things that we would like to learn. And then she would actually use that when she was making her study plans. So she was just very different to the other teachers. Not that there was anything specifically wrong with their style, but she just had a way of really engaging with us. And she wasn't, like, she had this presence, but she wasn't a very imposing sort of woman. She sort of reminded me of Mrs. Claus. She was probably mid-50s, maybe 60. Not very good at judging ages, but she was... she described herself as an egg on legs. That's how she described it. And she would bring cheesels to school every day, and she'd put them on her fingers, and she'd eat them off her fingers. She was a bit of a child at the same time as being a very responsible adult. So I think she just really knew how to interact with younger children, even though obviously she was 40 plus years older than we were. Yeah.
Moving on to part 3. How has education in your country changed in the last 10 years?
So I think it's gotten a lot more digital. And when I think about my younger cousins who are still in school, they speak about how their school has a 3D printer, which is just like blows my mind because we never had anything like that. Again, small rural school also plays a part in this. But the way that they are able to use these technologies, and I consider myself someone who understands technology quite well, but their understanding is just a next level to what we have. And I think that's sort of the direction that it's going. Everything's getting quite digital, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. I think that's just keeping in line with the times. As we're developing as a race, we're going to become more technological, and they're just teaching children to be involved with that.
What changes do you foresee in the next 50 years?
So continuing on with the technology standpoint on things, I think it's going to get more technology based. And I think what this epidemic is showing us is just how much we can do online. And I think it's really sort of pushing people to do that because there hasn't been another option. So it's really advancing, our technology front. So things like, I think universities are getting to be more just online based, and there are of course already courses that you can do entirely online without leaving your home, which is very convenient for people who either are traveling or just not in a very easy to access location. They may have other commitments and they have to live in the country, but they still want a good quality education from a university in the city. That sort of thing is very positive. I think when we're looking at primary schools and high schools, it's going to be a bit of a blend. They're going to use more technologies, but they may not necessarily, they'll still have to come into school, I think, because it's still very important for development, and you have to really watch that children are actually doing the work. Whereas I think if you enroll in a university, you have to take care of yourself to a large extent. But I just think about, there was an episode of The Simpsons where the students are wearing virtual reality goggles, and I don't think we're that far away from that. There's lots of artificial augmented reality happening, and I think even at universities, when I was at university, you were able to do virtual tours of your campus. So I think that sort of learning will become quite mainstream.
How do the expectations of today's school leaders compare with the previous generations?
Sure. So I think previous generations, you didn't necessarily have to go to university. I don't think it was so much expected. Whereas I think these days, a lot of younger people are really encouraged to go to university. You still, of course, don't have to, but I think there's a higher level of pressure, like it's more expected these days. And when you look at just people getting a job, a lot of the time the jobs that they get aren't necessarily relevant to the degrees that they have, but people can just, there's such a big pool of applicants for jobs that someone could say, well, you don't need a degree for this, but I can see that you've got a 3-year bachelor's degree, which shows that you have commitment. So I'm going to choose you over this person who's a bit more of a risk because I don't know if they'll be able to commit to the job for a few years. So I think that's the main sort of difference there.
What role do you think extracurricular activities play in education?
I think they're very important because I think the school structure is still, for the most part, quite rigid, and these activities kind of give you an option to explore other career paths outside of that education. So things like drama or sport, people are quite quick to disregard them as something that you can't do for a career. But I think if you love them enough, you'll find the time outside of your school hours to work on them, and that's the sort of mindset you're going to have to succeed in these careers anyway. So it really gives you the chance to try it out.
What method of learning works best for you? How beneficial do you think it is for a group of students according to their level of ability?
So I think I know that I'm a very visual learner. I need to do things. I need to see them. Just writing things down and listening to them doesn't really work very well for me. So I need to be hands-on with something, or even if it's just like rote learning information about, science, for example. I need to draw pictures, and that's how I understand things. I think leveling people according to their ability, it has its positives and it has its negatives. I know that I went to school in Germany for a little while, and they organize their students quite young into high school levels, so a high, middle, and low. But it's very difficult, as I understand it, to go up once you're put into one of those categories. So if you're not performing when you're around about 13, 14 years old, they can put you into a high school and they just say like, well, they're going to be in the low level achievers, and then you're just stuck there till the end, and there's not much of an opportunity to really work your way up. And the only people who really get into university are in the high level of schooling. So I think that doesn't give you enough chance to improve, and it's still looking at things from quite a narrow viewpoint, I believe. So I think a lot of people pull their socks up and get down to hard work when they get a bit older, and it doesn't give people the chance to do that if you're too quick to put people into categories. And even if you're not necessarily putting them into different classes, but you're just saying, this is for you, this is for you, I think children start to believe that.
Great. Well, that concludes the Ielts test today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.